was a friend of mine. Her name was Brenda, and she moved back. She was from there originally. She was working now with her.
Does everybody have noisemakers? Let me hear your noisemakers. Yeah. You gotta put that between your hands and do like this. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, get some good practice in while you have a chance. Have we started?
We're live now.
We are live. It's Shabbat afternoon live.
Shabbat afternoon live.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Purim Sameach.
Chag Purim Sameach.
Or just Purim Sameach.
Purim Sameach.
All right. Yeah, those are all the greetings you can use today. And it is still Purim. You know, Purim was supposed to be 1 day, and then it became 2 days. And so it was yesterday, was today too Purim, right? So Purim or Purim. So we're still celebrating now. I want to start today's message in a different place. I want to start in the prophets, in Yeshua or Isaiah. We've been reading there this week, right? And one of the focuses deals with Shabbat. And it deals with, you know, some people struggle with, you know, should I do Purim if I'm not Jewish? Right? I mean, I'm not Jewish. What am I doing Purim for? Right? So let me throw something at you. Yeshayahu, Isaiah 56:3 and 6 and 7. And there it talks about the foreigners. That would be Gentiles in context. And also there's a part in the stuck in the middle about eunuchs. You know what a eunuch is? Yeah. So any eunuchs in the room? Yeah, I didn't think so. So, you know, those verses we can kind of ignore, but if you're a eunuch, they're great for you, you know. Okay, so, but some of the essence of this chapter is a foreigner, or a Gentile, you could say, someone from the nations, all right, joining Adonai. How many here have joined Adonai? Yeah. Hopefully every hand goes up, right? Right. A foreigner joining Adonai should not say, and this is what they should not say, it's in quotes. God is saying this, by the way. Adonai is the one saying this. Adonai will separate me from his people. You are not to say that. And his people in context are who? We. Israel. Mm-hmm. Israel. The Jewish people. Foreigners who join themselves to Adonai to serve him. How many of you are Gentiles who have joined yourself to Adonai in order to serve him? Okay. All who keep Shabbat. There's a parallel. If you joined him to serve him, you have also done this. All who keep Shabbat, who observe, who guard, who do Shabbat, and hold fast to my covenant, I will bring them to my holy mountain. Where's this holy mountain?
Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's in Jerusalem, Mount Zion, and Mount Moriah, where the temple stood. That's this holy mountain. I will bring them. It's not that you're, oh, I really kind of feel like going there. He's going to bring you to his holy mountain. For my house will be called, and your sacrifices will be accepted there. By the way, in between. But then another quote here was, for my house, this is the context for this phrase, this often thrown about, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. This is why Yeshua, when he got all upset going to the temple and finding all the merchants there who were ripping people off, do you know where those merchants were? They were in the court of the Gentiles. This is why he was upset, and this is why he quoted that verse. My house would be called a house of prayer for all the nations, and you set up a market in the court of the Gentiles. How are they supposed to come and pray in my house? Shabbat is for all mankind. Do you agree? Do you struggle maybe with that? What did Yeshua say? Yeshua said about Shabbat, he said that it was made for man, meaning it was made for mankind. He didn't say it was made for Israel. He said it was made for man. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. Believers, and it's not just Shabbat, right? Not just Shabbat. Believers are grafted into Israel. There are two different, people get them confused sometimes. One of the songs earlier, there's a metaphor, image of a vine, and all believers are branches attached to a vine. In that picture, the vine is what? Yeshua. And Jews and Gentiles, regardless, are all branches, in that vine of Yeshua. But there's another picture, which is a picture of the tree of Israel. That's why the branches that are Jewish people or Israeli people, those branches are called the natural branches. It's called their tree. This is Romans 11. And other people who are not Jewish, not natural branches, are called, it's a pretty cool term too, wild branches. And the wild branches are taken from other trees like the Afghani tree and the New Zealand tree. And they're grafted into the tree of Israel. You are grafted in to Israel and brought near the covenants. Notice it's plural. You're brought near the covenants. This is from Ephesians 2. Entering the commonwealth of Israel. You become part of Israel. Your DNA didn't change that you became Jewish, but you are part of Israel. When you read things like there's no longer Jew and Gentile, look in the context. There's no longer male and female. There's no longer Jew and Gentile. There's no longer slave and free. How many know that if you were a slave and you read that, you were still a slave? Or if you were free and you read that, you were still free? If you were a male and you read that, next time you took a shower, you could check, you're still a male. And vice versa with the female, right? Same thing with the Jew and Gentile. It's talking, there's a message there, and it's not about denying reality. It's about your standing before God. We are all one, we are all equal in His eyes. All of us can enter His presence and call on Him when we're in need. Does this make sense? You are grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. Just because you were born in Australia, you are still a citizen of the empire of Great Britain. For example. Same thing. Same thing. So yes, Hanukkah is for you. Yes, especially the biblical feasts are for you. Yes, Sukkot, after he returns, all the nations will have to send representatives to Jerusalem, and if you don't, guess what? You get no rain. That's right, if Egypt, and you know what, whenever it says something specific in the Bible, it means it's going to happen. It says, yes, if Egypt doesn't go, which tells us what? That Egypt's going to try not going. And guess what's going to happen? They're not going to get any rain. Right, so all Sukkot is going to be celebrated. Shabbat's going to be celebrated. Rosh Chodesh, the new moons, are going to be celebrated by all mankind. We say it every week in the V'shamru. It's from the Scripture directly. One day, all flesh will worship before me on Rosh Chodesh and Shabbat, says Adonai. Says Adonai. These things are for you, and Purim is for you. You've been grafted in to Israel. So let's go to the Torah portion we had. Adonai, and I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights to get us going into this. What is Purim? What is it really all about, right? So Adonai said to Moshe at this one point, they're traveling in the wilderness, and the people of Amalek, his descendants, right, that's his people group, were attacking the stragglers. When you're traveling, some people, the young men are way up in front. They always walk really fast, right? And then there's some people who are straggling behind. Maybe the kids are playing, you don't know where they are, that there's grandma way in the back, or whatever, and she's just trying to keep up and whatever. The people of Amalek were attacking the stragglers. This is why there was a battle. This was why there was a war. God told them to stop and go to war with Amalek. He said, and more than that, he said to Moshe, write this in a book to be remembered. I don't want anyone to forget this. Write this down. I will blot. This isn't you will. I, Adonai, I will blot out any memory of Amalek. You can see his name right here in Hebrew, Amalek. And you see at one point through this, they get this great victory over Amalek, right? And God has one of his names given in this passage, Adonai Nisi. Adonai is my banner. Or you see the root here that comes from Hanukkah, right? Nes. Nes Gadol Haya Sham. Nes Gadol Haya Po. Nes, you see the noon in the summit. It could be possibly, some say, Adonai is my miracle. And he says, wipe out Amalek. People who do this sort of thing, they are, you know what he says about them? He says their hand was against the throne of Yah. He doesn't say because they were attacking stragglers, because I like you guys and you're nice and stuff. No, because their hand, when God is looking at Israel, he's saying, that's my throne. Wow. His presence, he dwells, the place he sits, or the place he dwells, is among Israel. That is his throne. You attack Israel, you are attacking God. You are attacking his people. If you're a king and someone attacks your people, are they not attacking you? They're attacking your country. They're attacking you. If you put your hand on a king's throne, what are we talking about, metaphorically? You're like trying to take that throne. You want to sit on that throne. You want to replace the person who should be sitting on that throne. They're trying to replace. Do you see? Adonai will fight against Amalek. Adonai will fight against Amalek. Do you hear? Who will fight against Amalek? Generation after generation. Forever, Adonai will fight against Amalek. We move on to the prophets and we see a passage we were reading about King Shaul, right? Because of what we read in the Torah, at one point God directed the king, Shaul, you need to go and you need to wipe out Amalek. Should have been done already by now. Here, go and do it. So here's what Adonai Tzevaot says, I remember what Amalek did to Israel. It had been hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. I can't remember what I had for breakfast the other day. But it was hundreds of years, and Adonai says, I remember what Amalek did to Israel. Now go and attack Amalek and completely destroy everything. Chara. It means everything there is dedicated to God for destruction. Like in Jericho. Don't take anything. This isn't about plunder. This is about judgment. This is about justice. It's not about making you rich or something. Shaul and the people, it says, they went and they had this great victory, right? Then it says, Shaul and the people spared Agag. Agag was the king. Everyone say Agag.
Agag.
And check the part I put in bold here. They didn't just spare Agag, and everything that was good. And there's his name in Hebrew, by the way, Agag or Agag. In biblical, it's a little bit different. This is the context. When Samuel heard, he walked into the king's presence. God had sent him there because God already told the prophet, he disobeyed me. Go and tell him he's losing the kingdom. He disobeyed me. And he didn't consider it a light thing because it dealt with Amalek. And God did not consider the situation with Amalek a light thing. But the people apparently did. They started, anything that looked good, they wanted to keep it. Shaul started talking about, well, we only kept some of the, look, I did everything you said when Shmuel came. He said, look, we did everything you said. But we kept some of this stuff, for sacrifice later. Before he could get that part out, when he said, I did everything you said, Shmuel said, you see what I got in the corner there? The prophet said to him, if so, what is this bleating of sheep in my ears? Why am I hearing sheep then, if everything's been destroyed? Do you think I'm stupid? You might have said that, right? He said, well, we kept some of the stuff for, to sacrifice to Adonai, that's all. Right? Pretty good excuse. Skepticism. So maybe some of you do things like this. Maybe you don't do God's will entirely, and then you make up excuses for why. This is the context, by the way, for this phrase, obeying is better than sacrifice. Obeying is better than... If you're living in disobedience, God will not look at your sacrifice. Your sacrifice is garbage to him if you're not living in obedience. This is why he talks about fasting in another passage. You're sitting there, you're fasting, you're doing these rituals, but you're living in disobedience. I hate your festivals. It's not that he changed his mind about the festivals, it's that they are not right. Their heart is not right. That's like extra stuff or something, If you're going around cheating your neighbors and lying, or even, God forbid, a murderer or something, and you're hiding it, you think he honors your sacrifice when you go to the temple? Mm-mm. Folks, we got to get our hearts right. Mm-hmm. Are there other sins that people do today? And then they go to the temple, and they think that they're okay. They think, I'll go to shul, and I'll give my tithe or something, and it's sort of like paying God off. And then I'll be okay. Well, yeah, God wants those things, but you know what? He will not honor that sacrifice when you're living in disobedience. Obeying is better than sacrifice. You cannot live in disobedience and pay him off. You can't bribe Yah. You can't pay your way into the kingdom. Mm-hmm. Rebellion is like the sin of sorcery. That's verse 23. I didn't make it up. It's in your Bible. Rebellion is like the sin of sorcery. And what does that mean? What is the sin of sorcery? I mean, what is the penalty for the sin of sorcery?
Death.
It's called an abomination. An abomination. You know what happens if you wound up eating something that wasn't clean? You know what? You go and you wash. You go and you wash and you clean by evening. Different category. If you're doing it purposely all the time, maybe that's rebellion. Maybe that changes. When you're purposely doing wrong, regardless what level, you know what I mean? It's one thing to do something by accident. It's another thing when you're doing it all the time on purpose. It's a sin unto death. That phrase might be more familiar. There are sins unto death, and there are sins not unto death. But why this is so, haram, destroy everything. men, women, and children, the cattle and everything? I mean, and not take anything and just leave it all and burn it and whatever? I mean, what is it, you know, that's hard to justify, right? That's like evil. That sounds evil to me. It sounds evil, right? No, it's justice. God sees that big picture. The God who knows the future is working to protect his people. He knows what is best. He knows when people have gone over the line. He sent Abraham from Canaan down into Egypt as a people, his descendants, for over 400 years to give time for the people in Canaan to repent, and they never did. He gave the people before the flood over 1,000 years, almost 2,000 years, I think, 2,000 years to turn from their evil, and they never did. He sent people, preachers to them, prophets to them, to tell them to turn, to tell them what they're doing wrong, to say, "Thus saith the Lord," and they didn't listen. And they didn't listen. It's our duty to trust him and obey him wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. Don't hold back. You have been placed here on this world, in this time frame, by him for a reason. For a reason. To do his will in your life, whatever it is. Do you know what it is? Might be a good thing to find out.
Mm-hmm.
So that you could do his will, because obedience is better than sacrifice.
Amen.
We're not here to question him. We're not here to disobey him. But why so harsh? Why judge the people, the evil people, so completely? Why not some mercy here? I mean, what could possibly happen? What could possibly happen? Let's find out what could possibly happen in the book of Esther. Go to chapter 1. I don't know how much I'm going to read and how much I'm just going to talk. So just let's see what happens. Adonai Savatati Iftach Ufi Adi Tehilatecha. Adonai, open my lips, my heart may tell forth your praise. Now, chapter 1, we have this king, Ahashverosh. Everyone say Ahashverosh.
Ahashverosh.
Ahashverosh. He's also known as Xerxes. And yes, it's the same Xerxes if you saw like 300 or the Spartan deal with, the big war with the pass and everything. It's the same guy. He's the one he invaded, because there was a history behind that, obviously, and I could go into that, but I'm not going to go that far. Because that was my thing, history. So, but there was a history there, and they had been planning an invasion of Greece as retribution against Athens. Mainly, they were going to go and take care of Athens because Athens dared at one point to stand up to the Persian Empire. Who are they? Some little tiny city-state against the Persian Empire that extends from India down all the way across Asia and down into Africa as far as Ethiopia. Who are they to stand up against us? This is ridiculous. We are going to not only take Athens, we are going to destroy Greece, says Ahasuerus. And he had someone that would whisper in his ear every morning, remember Athens. Whatever was going on with his state, he did not want to forget. He had somebody appointed. Every day, I had Larry come over to me and say, John, remember Athens. And Debbie's getting nervous because she's Greek over there. She's like, oh no. When you read in chapter 1, there's this huge festival, this feast, right, that the king is putting on for all his people, and all the common people for days and days and days, right? This feasting and feasting and feasting, and then there's like an inner feast for the higher ups for another few days, and they start, and what they're doing. This is what when they made invasion plans against Greece, Yavan in Hebrew. They were making their invasion plans. It was normal, it was common practice. You could read about this in the writings of Herodotus, known as the father of historians or whatever, because supposedly he's the first historian. I disagree. I believe that was Moses. Actually, before that, Joseph, and maybe even some before that. Moses was clearly there before Herodotus. And we have some first-person narrative accounts from Joseph and quotations from Joseph, but before that, a little more difficult to say. Herodotus tells us that it was normal in the Persian court for the Persian heads of state to make plans while they were drinking. I'm not talking about drinking water, right? They said that they would be more in tune with the spirit world if they were drinking. You hear things like that today about drugs, for example. Being more in tune with the universe, man. I think it's more like a 60s thing. But some people still. They felt they were more in tune with the spirit world. Now, before you go too crazy with that, they would make these decisions while they're drinking at big drinking parties like this one, biggest drinking party I ever heard of. This is huge. And then they would validate it the next day. Like some people make some very stupid decisions when they're drinking as well, right? Mm-hmm. So the next day they would have somebody that would review what they had written and verify or not verify those decisions. Matters of state made while they're drinking. Well, one of those decisions was not a matter of state, though, right? He said, "Send for my wife, right? I want her to come and display her beauty for all the people." Now, in Jewish tradition says one thing and history says something. So I gave you a little bit of both. The Jewish traditional account of this is that what he wanted was for his wife, the queen, to come and display all her beauty, wearing nothing but the crown.
All her beauty, yes.
I don't know, maybe some of you heard this. That's kind of a traditional Jewish understanding. This is why she would say no. No, it was a little different than that. Another thing from history, a Persian queen would not even go into public with nothing over her face. No one is allowed to even see the face of a Persian queen. And here the king wants her to come and display her beauty in front of all the common folk. Imagine her disdain.
Mm-mm.
She knows the cultural rules. What am I? What is he looking at her as to ask her to do something like that? Right? It's as bad as the idea in the Jewish tradition, in her mind.
Yeah.
You see? And there's a little bit of vanity here, right? She's busy hosting her own party. Don't bother me. I'm happy. I'm having fun over here. No, go away. Maybe that's a little bit of it too. The spirit of Vashti. The king calls and you say, "I'm busy right now." Maybe some of us have the spirit of Vashti when God calls us. A matter of respect. Some people can't handle authority properly. You get a little bit of authority, you start getting a big head, and you start saying no to people who are over you when you don't have the authority to say no to the people over you. You start to think that it's your store that you work at. And you should be able to handle this area any way you please because you know better than the manager or the store owner. Now, there's one thing to take ownership, say this is, take pride in your work and encompass the goals and try to do your best for the store. It's another thing to get this big head and rebel against the owner or the person that's hired you. You see? Or you could say, or to rebel against God. God tells you to do something. I think it would be better if we did this, though. Well, you might sacrifice a lot to do your little plan, but if it's not what God said to do you see? Do you see? Anyway, if he let her get away with that, if God let you get away with something like that, right? He will bring about, this counselors, his advisors said, it will bring about no end of disrespect. Let me ask you a question. You think they were right? He said, Vashti won't, I'm the king. I ordered this woman, my queen, to come. And she said, no. What should I do, guys? What should I do, advisors? They said, if you don't take care of this, if you don't replace her, if you don't get rid of her, she will be like an icon for all the women against their husbands from henceforth. And they will say, the queen didn't come when the king called her. That's what they'll say. Any time they say, what time is dinner? I'm not making dinner. Why should I do what you say? The queen didn't come when... It would be the excuse for everything. I mean, now we live in a different age, right? We have feminine, very different age. A very different age. And so the question is, were they right? If they would have left that door open, were they right? Would women have started
I wondered when
and
it all
never
started.
ended disrespecting their husbands?
This is when it started.
It's a rhetorical question, especially for the husbands. Don't answer. But it's something for all of us to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's something, again, the image, take that image and put it on God and God's people. When God tells his people to do something and we say no, if God doesn't have any discipline, if he doesn't discipline his people for saying no, then what happens? We have whole theories of hyper grace, right?
Mm-hmm.
These days.
Anarchy.
You can do whatever you want. As long as you said a magic prayer, God doesn't care anymore.
Calvinism at its finest.
No. I'm sorry, no. He does care. He cares very much. And he has the analogy, a parent who does not discipline their child doesn't love their child. You think God loves his people? We're called his children. You think God doesn't love his children? Well, then he disciplines us. Maybe you've experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
Every man should be master in his own house. Does this reflect our culture?
Unfortunately not.
Who's the master in houses today? And before you answer the question, I would suggest, that they're trying to make the government the master in everyone's house. The children are being taught to disrespect their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's being taught to disrespect the father.
It's kind of like the TV, social media, and internet are becoming the master of the
house. It didn't start
house.
recently.
Yeah.
You can see, like old Honeymooners episodes, you can see very strongly. For example. The head of the house is portrayed as an idiot, not worthy of respect in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 2, Mishle, or Proverbs 31:4 and 5 tells us that kings shouldn't drink because they might pervert justice. It's very different than that Persian idea, right? With, hey, we make all our decisions while we're drinking. That's when we do our best thinking. Maybe you've heard somebody talk that way about drinking. King, they might pervert justice. Did Vashti get justice? That was one decision that he made while he was drinking. Oh no. Another decision he made while drinking was about the invasion. How did that go? Do you have any historians in the group or anyone who's watched any of those movies about the invasion? Didn't go so well. Didn't go so well. Massive million-man army, right? Coming down, descending on some tiny little city-states, and they lost. They did eventually burn Athens, but then they were driven back, and they lost. Yeah, and that was 481 through 479. That's a 3-year period. Liquor impacts judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone not know that? Thank you. Liquor impacts your judgment. If you have any big decisions, I don't recommend the Persian way. I recommend Mishle.
Yeah, Michelet is much better.
A little while later, it says. And the little while later that we say is about 6 years between Vashti and Esther. You have a 3-year period of an invasion. And you have, how long were the women supposed to be prepared before they could go and see the king? A year. And then there's a process of all these women. Whenever he chooses, it wasn't necessarily every single night. And I've done my study and everything. By the time Esther goes in, Ahasuerus had about 360 concubines. That means, on this side, in this house, you're a virgin being prepared and waiting for your turn. Then you get your one night with the king. That's the name of the movie now, right? One night with the king. And then after that, you either become queen or you move over to that house, which is the house for the concubines. And which means you're no longer a virgin, right? And you're also no longer going home or anything, because you've been with the king. That's not happening. You belong to the king now. 360 concubines by the time he sees Esther.
Wow.
And he sees Esther, it's very specific in the text, on the 10th of Tevet. You can look in verse 16. And there's a guy named Haggai who's in charge of the harem. That's where the side where the virgins were, verse 3. And another guy, Shaashgaz, who is in charge of the concubines. 2 different areas, right? And then there was a guy that comes into the story named, are you ready? Mordecai.
Yay!
All right. And Mordecai was the uncle of someone, the uncle of a girl named Hadassah. And so Mordecai was a descendant of Kish, which is notable. Why? Who's Kish? Really? Okay, so Shaul is a descendant of Kish, meaning King Shaul, King Saul was a descendant of Kish. And King Shaul was supposed to have gotten rid of all the Amalekites, right? They were supposed to be wiped out. So it's interesting, entering the story is a guy who's a descendant of Kish. And he has adopted his niece named Hadassah, literally adopted her as a daughter. All right? And notice, so he's teaching her, he's training her, and she winds up, it's not like see it portrayed like a beauty contest or something. That's not what's happening here, right? And also, you think maybe some women are like volunteering and going, I want to be the queen or something. Well, it wasn't the story for Esther. The text tells us she was taken into the king's house. Some movies portray that adequately and others do not. But she didn't decide to go to the king's house. She was taken. But when she went, she gained the favor of Haggai, so much so that he put her in the best place there, the best living quarters, and even gave her several girls to serve her while she's there from the royal house. That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, right.
All right.
Yeah, right.
I mean, if you're going to be kidnapped, you might as well have a whole bunch of servants, waiting on you day after night, day and night. Esther, because Mordecai had instructed her, did not disclose her people, meaning she didn't disclose what she was. She hid her Jewishness. You with me?
Mhm.
Because her uncle instructed her. Because there had been people there's been many times in the past. I'm reading a book right now, Jewish Pirates. Pretty cool. And another one I just read recently, Jewish Conquistadors, right? A lot of Jewish people who escaped the Inquisition, who escaped the Inquisition. Pan the camera a second.
Here, I panned the camera
A lot
there.
of Jewish people escaped the Inquisition by coming to the Americas, with Columbus and with other explorers.
There we go.
After that, and they had to hide their identity because Jewish people weren't allowed to come to the Americas. They weren't allowed to stay in Spain, either become a Christian or be burned at the stake or get out. And then they clamped down. They said, "You can't get out." So they had to sneak out. A lot like Nazi Germany, huh? The rules keep changing. The rules keep changing. Okay, so she's in this place where she has to hide her identity, and that's why we wear costumes now, right? Because we recognize there are times in our history when we had to hide our identity just to survive. Mordecai, not going to be able to be around Esther, wants to make sure she's safe. And he knows that Jewish people have a lot of enemies. Don't let people know. Right? By the way, while she's there, Mordecai would sneak over there, and the place, it's not sneak like hiding in the woods or something. He would go over and he would sit outside the king's gate and he'd be able to get word back and forth to Esther. And he'd be able to communicate through others. All right? Nothing scandalous. But while he's sitting at the king's gate, there are a couple guys, Bigtan and Teresh, who he overhears. They're plotting to assassinate the king. Evidently something happened and they were very upset and they wanted to assassinate the king. Well, Mordecai told Esther about this, and thank you, somebody was listening. I didn't know that for it. Okay, so Mordecai told Esther about this, and Esther reported this to the king. And those two paid the penalty for that. They were hanged on a stake. Okay? Mordecai was credited, and it was recorded in the daily journal. And that's very important. The things that are important were recorded in what, you could say chronicles, or you could say a daily journal. Important things were recorded, so it was recorded that Mordecai had saved the king. And by the way, before I go any further, you see the picture on the right side? A lot of translations are very bad on this account. They give you a picture like the Old West. Like there's a little stand built, and there's a little, beam going up, and another one coming across. A lot of us play word games with this called hangman, right? And you got the little rope coming down. No! That is not how it was done. They build a platform with stakes, prepared stakes, means filed off on the top, so they're nice and sharp. And basically, it was not the penalty. It was not the penalty that killed. It was not this that killed you. Your body, after you were killed, was impaled on the stake, like that. as an example, a public display, much like crucifixion, a public display, a warning to others. Don't be disobeying the king. This could happen to you, right? This is the hanged on a stake. When it says in a later chapter, I'll talk about it more when I get there. All right, next chapter, chapter 3. Get your groggers ready. Get your noisemakers. Let me hear a test. Come on. It says, Haman, Hagagi. Now you might, the ha is a definite article, and the e means, right, is like a type when there's, the e ending is like a people, identifying a people. So the Agagites, or Agagi, Ha-Agagi. So Haman was, now Agag, that should sound familiar, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the king who was trying to be spared. Now the prophet cut him down, but apparently that king was not the only one that was spared. Some of his descendants were also spared. Or we would not have Haman. And this guy Haman was so that all the people were like bowing to him. You know, he came so high up that people bowed to him when he was like riding through the streets and stuff, right? Coming through the king's gate. But Mordecai refused to bow down to him. Was this about worship? Do you think it was about worship? Bowing down? If you bow, is that worship?
Yes.
Sometimes it's worship, sometimes it's not. Yaakov, Jacob, when he goes to Egypt, when he's going to Egypt to meet his son Yosef, and he comes to meet the Pharaoh, do you know what Yaakov does? He bows to the Pharaoh. You know when Yaakov is coming back to the land after he escaped his brother Esau, you remember that deal? And he came back many years later, and then he sent all his wives and his kids and his stuff out ahead of him. And here comes Esau with 400 warriors, and he's left all by himself, and he's injured, right? And his brother's coming. You know what he does? He bows before his brother several times. Bowing's not necessarily worship. It can be just a show of respect. But he would not bow before Haman. And I hope, because of what I told you already, you would understand why. He's not going to bow before Haman the Agagi. You with me? Oh no.
Didn't like that.
You did
She didn't like that.
too good a
She
job.
did not like that.
Never wanted to play that.
Because there is very strong animosity. The Agagites are mortal enemies, long time, mortal enemies of Israel. Ever since, striking at us in the desert, striking at the stragglers, and God declaring war against them generation after generation. Is Mordecai supposed to bow to them?
Hey!
Thank you. Jane is on the stick.
Mm-hmm.
No, she's not on this thing.
Now, Haman, he can't, he doesn't notice it himself at first until people bring it up to him, it says. Then he notices it every time after that, right? And when he hears about it, he learns what people Mordecai
Yay!
This is a very important phrase. If Mordecai was from any other place, maybe it wouldn't matter so much. But he learned what people Mordecai was from.
Yay!
And that mattered a great deal. And he learned that it wasn't enough to take care of Haman, to take care of Haman. He wanted to exterminate the whole people of Israel. And there's a word here in this chapter, Purim. So he started to plan out the extinction of the Jewish people, of the people of Israel. by casting down what were called pur, or plural, Purim, like lots. Okay? And it's really not cast them down. We say cast lots. Well, it's caused to fall. You're dropping them. You know, sometimes you throw something a certain way, you can maybe get it to land a certain way or something, you know. Well, that's not the idea of this. It's supposed to be let the divine, you know, whatever, take care and show us the answer, you know. So you let it or cause it to fall, but not casting it. You with me? This is how he's choosing the day when the people would be exterminated. And then he goes to the king. And he comes to see the king, Ahasuerus, and he talks about the people of Israel. He has to talk the king into this. He can't do this on his own. So when he goes before him, he's got to be careful what he says. How am I going to get the king to agree to this? To killing a lot of his own subjects? I mean, that's crazy, right? But you know, politicians, they have a way sometimes of making evil sound good and good sounding evil. Maybe you know this. Maybe some of you know this. And so here's how we would go about it with the people of Israel. They're a very peculiar people, king. They're very peculiar. They're not the same as us. They're not like me and you. They're the other. They're different. A peculiar people whose laws are different. See, they have this thing called the Torah. Not like us, king. They try to follow, you know, their God's laws. They put those over your laws, even, king. Maybe you know some people with the attitude that that's a very negative thing. It's a very bad thing that you would put God's law above any other laws. Maybe people look at you and they think of you as very peculiar.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't befit the king to tolerate them. It's not fitting for you, king. You shouldn't have these people around. They're evil. You shouldn't even tolerate them. That's a key word in politics in recent decades.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of fading away because now, you know, some people, you know, you shouldn't tolerate now. Maybe they're sitting in this room, I think. Right? If you're not politically correct. It doesn't befit the king to tolerate that. So with a whole bunch of cash, he basically bribes the king. I'll take care of it for you, king. I'll pay for it all. It's like 30 tons of silver that he puts into the king's treasury for this. So the king gives him his signet ring. What does that mean? Royal authority. You're acting on my behalf. You got it, Haman.
Boo!
You got it, Haman.
Boo!
With the signet ring and with cash from the royal treasury, a final solution is decreed. And it's decreed on the day before the Seder, if you look at the dates that they give. Imagine you're getting ready to celebrate the Seder, to celebrate Passover, and while you're in exile, and this decree comes out, marking your distinction in less than a year. That kind of puts a damper on your party.
But then you remember the Passover. Remember the Passover.
Might be our last one, right? And the decree is for extermination. And it's read to everyone, everywhere, throughout the empire. Everyone knows. And so Mordecai,
Yay!
go into mourning. He's wearing sackcloth and ashes. Everyone's crying bitterly, all the Jewish people, and lamenting. It's called a great mourning. A great mourning. Mourning's for when you die, right? But how can this be stopped? The king's decreed it. And where are we going to go? We can't go back home. We're not allowed to. Oh wait, yeah, we would be allowed to, but it wouldn't help. Remember Sanballat and all those people around? Wouldn't do any good. You're thinking? So, Hatach, one of the king's officials. Mordecai sees this person and relates. Remember, he would go to the king's gate, and he couldn't go as far as he used to go because you're not allowed to go into that area if you're not dressed properly. So he had to sit out even further, and he got someone to take the message back to Esther and let her know what's going on, because in the palace she might not have even. That's weird. Like, people high up, sometimes they don't hear things and know things that you know. They're too busy or too preoccupied with affairs of state or something, and they don't really get what's going on.
They were drinking.
So he has to pass the word. Mordecai passes the word to Esther, or Hadassah, instructing her to intercede for her people, for Amah. This is the Hebrew people, Amah, her people. Some of you Hebrew students should know this. Just quickly that. Right? Because le'et kazot. Everyone say le'et kazot.
Le'et kasot.
For a time like this, or for such a time as this, you attained royalty. Who's to say that you're not in your position, whatever it is? And no one's to say that, because you are. You are all in position right now where God has placed you to do the right thing throughout your life. In different, you see anti-Semitism, what do? Do you ignore it? You know, there's these sayings, right? Evil prospers when good men do nothing.
Right.
It's true. God put you on this earth for a reason. People don't hear the Besorah, the good news, unless someone says it to them, tells them. You probably run into a lot of people who are not going to very likely find their way here. You have a purpose out there. There are many things you're called to do and to be. And those are two of them. Le'et kazot, for such a time as this, you attained royalty. And so what does she do? She's like, I can't even go into his presence. I can't even, unless he calls me, I can't even go to see him. I can try, I can like walk in there anyway, but you know what happens if I just walk into the king's court and I haven't been bidden? That's right, Lena. Off with it in her head. Unless he's sitting there, maybe he's in a good mood from all that drinking or whatever, and he sees her, oh, Esther, and he extends the scepter. Otherwise, there are people back there who will just cut her head off. They've got to be paying attention, too, to see if the king extends the scepter, or she might get her head cut off by accident. So she goes into a 3-day fast. You know, this is one of those books there are several words you don't see. You don't see the word for God in this whole book. And yet he's everywhere throughout the book. Every circumstance works together perfectly in this book. You think that's an accident? There are people in this world, as a matter of fact, many of you in this room maybe, God is guiding every step that you take through your life, and you don't acknowledge it. Much of it you don't. You feel like maybe you're just kind of wandering through life or something. I don't understand what's happening, and this sort of idea. And that's because maybe you don't have the big picture, but I hope you trust that God is guiding you through this life. He knows what's best, and He knows what people plan against you. The shield of Abraham is your shield as well. But like us, she's very nervous. Rightfully so, right? She could be putting herself, like, committing suicide, basically, going in to see the king if she's unfit. So she asked that all the Jewish people would fast for her. And she fasted for 3 days. Then I will go to the king, she says, and if I perish, I perish. I can accept that, right? He says, because, he said, don't think that just because you're in the royal household that somehow you're going to escape. If you don't stand up now, being put where you have been put, if you don't stand up, you and your household will be exterminated. But God will save the Jewish people from some other place. There's a time to hide who you are, and there's a time to take a stand.
Ecclesiastics.
Right? It's a time to take the costume off. Chapter 5. So Esther goes before the king, and she wins his favor. She, he puts out the scepter, and she touches the scepter, and her life is spared because he remembers her fondly. So that the gold scepter, big deal. And you know what? He's like, "What do you want, Esther?" This is like very surprising. He must be very shocked, right, that she would dare something like this to come before him. It must be something very important. So, he must be very, very curious then. What is it that you want, Esther? What brings you here? Angie, what brings you here? It's very, you got me intrigued here. What's going on? And what does she say? She says,
Let's have a feast.
why don't you come to a party I'm having and I'll tell you there. Right? Women know how to work us, guys. I'm just telling you. I'm not going to tell you now. I'll tell you later. So in this party, Bamishte Hayai. Bamishte, everyone say Bamishte
Bamishte
Hayai.
Hayai.
Who can tell me what yain is? Wine. It's a festival or feast of wine. It's not a festival, I don't know what you were picturing before of this festival. It's not a big, like a grand, elegant, buffet or something of delicacies. No, this is a drinking party of wine. It's a party of wine. In the Greek, tato. Tato. Everyone say pato.
Pato.
And again, it means drinking party in the Greek as well. The word that's used there. That's what he invites her to. So when she invites Haman to the party. So Haman is very excited, and he's telling his wife Zeresh. Everyone say Zeresh.
Zeresh.
She's the wife of Haman.
Boo.
Wife is the villain, and he's boasting to all his family there. Look at me, I'm so rich now. This is amazing. And look, I have all these sons here, and I'm in a position like right under the king, man. I'm right there, like top dog, second man. I'm right on the edge, right? He's doing all this boasting to his wife and everything, and she. So what do they recognize? But at the end he says, "But none of this does me any good at all, as long as I have to keep seeing that Mordecai
Yay!
sitting at the gate, thumbing his nose at me, not bowing down. That Jewish guy." Yeah. Right? Okay. So his wife talks him into this plan. She says, Ya'asu eitz. Ya'asu eitz. Make or prepare a tree. That's what the Hebrew says very literally. Doesn't say prepare a gallows. Basically, we know how the Persians did what they did. Prepare the stake. An execution stake. 70. We want to make a show of this guy. We want to put him on display. Make this stake 75 feet high. So his body will be hanging on that stake, impaled, for everyone to see. And talk to the king in the morning to get rid of this Mordecai.
Yay.
And he says, let the stake be put up. Go to Esther 6. That night, very important words in this story, that night. This is where God intervenes. Halfway through, there's 10 chapters. 5 chapters, things looking very bad. Chapter 6, we start to see. That very night, the king couldn't sleep. Why couldn't he sleep? Because he went to this party, there's this party, and the queen wouldn't let him know again. She's inviting him to a second party. I'm like, he's already intrigued when she first came in. Like, she's chancing death to come see me. It must be very important. Then she won't tell me what it is. Then she invites me to a party. I go to the party. She won't tell me what it is. I got to come back for a second party. I can't sleep. What's wrong with this woman anyway? It must be something very serious. I don't know why she won't talk to me, though. Does she trust me? What's the problem? Guys, you know what it's like. He can't sleep. Balayla hahu. That night. Everyone say balayla hahu.
Balayla hahu.
That night, the king could not sleep. So what happens when you can't sleep?
You read Chronicles.
Read Chronicles.
Daily journal. Yeah, remember that? The daily journal. Yeah, we saw that term earlier in our story, right? Something was written there. You remember what it was? There was a story of Mordecai.
Yay.
How he had reported these 2 guys who were going to assassinate the king. It just happened to be that's the portion of the Chronicles that they're reading to him to put him to sleep. And he's hearing this, and he's like, hey, whatever happened to that Mordecai? What did we ever do for him?
Yay.
What honor or distinction was conferred on Mordecai?
Yay.
And the answer was, nothing was done for him. Nothing was done for him. A guy that saved the king's life, nothing was done for him. So in the morning, right? This is already morning. He couldn't sleep. He must have been listening for a while because it says, when they said nothing was done for him, before he could finish talking about this, Haman had come into the courtyard to discuss, and the reason he had come, think about what the king had just heard. Haman just came into the courtyard in order to discuss hanging Mordecai. Mordecai. But Haman doesn't know this. He goes before the king, and he says, Haman, what should be done for a man that the king wants to honor? Right? And Haman, with his after being invited to the queen's parties and being raised up so high, he's thinking, you got to be talking about me. Got to be. Maybe that's what the queen told him. Maybe she told him in private, hey, we should really honor that Haman guy. That's what he's thinking. And so he talks about this big spiel. Well, let him wear the king's clothes and ride the king's Maserati down the main street, and have somebody hollering out, this is the highest guy in the kingdom. This is what happens to the man the king favors. I get to ride his Lamborghini and wave at all you people, you comic folk, right? So Haman's giving all this big spiel. And then the king says, do this for Mordecai.
Yay!
Imagine the shock. Imagine the shock. I just came to talk to him about hanging Mordecai. What happened? What happened? And so he's totally embarrassed and humiliated as he's leading the donkey all through. This is what happened. This is highly favored from the king. Everybody cheer Mordecai. All day long. And he gets, after going through all the parading Mordecai through all the city. And he goes home to tell his wife and his family what happened. And you're not going to believe this, Diana. You're not going to believe this. Ah, such a day I had. I couldn't believe. I thought it was going to be so good. Right? And what does she say? His oh so supportive wife looks to him and says, the one who suggested the execution stake, 75 feet tall, and she says to him, you know, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is a Jew, your downfall is certain.
Thank you,
That's such a wife, right? So supportive. Such comfort. And while they were still talking, it says, while his wife is still talking to him about this, an official from the palace shows up to take him off to the second party. There's no escape for Haman. He has no idea what's going to happen in chapter 7, where the king says again to Esther, we don't care so much about Esther. Whatever you request, up to half the kingdom shall be granted. I've heard this term before.
Yeah.
My own life. What does she say she wants after all of this making him wait for so long? Now he's thinking it must be important. She must be something. She wants to ask me something big. I really love Esther. I'll give her whatever she wants. I'm going to make her happy. Then maybe she'll talk to me more or something. And so, right? And her answer is, my own life and the lives of my people, for we have been sold in order to be exterminated. All right, you're the king, and you hear this from your wife. How does that make you feel?
Well, I'm going to take that guy down.
I'll whip somebody.
How does that make you feel? Where is the man who dared to do such a thing, the king says. Esther turns and she says, it's this wicked Haman. And he gets so infuriated that he walks out, and I think he's walking out to get some guards.
Cigars?
Some guards. Some cigars too, I don't know. To get some guards. And I'll tell you why in a minute. And while he's gone, Haman goes to plead with Esther, and he trips or something because he winds up falling on the couch with her. And he's falling on the couch, as he's falling on the couch, pleading with her, like he's falling on the couch. I don't know if he fell like partly on top of her or something, but some reason the king says, is he even going to rape the queen here in the palace before my eyes? As he's coming back in, probably with some guards, because you know what? The next thing they say, they covered Haman's face. Verse 8. Now, it doesn't say they covered his head. It says they covered his face. We're not talking about putting a bag over his head to lead him out or something. They covered his face. This is an analogy. This is something you do for someone who has already died. You cover their face. Haman has already been executed.
Ooh.
You mean before he fell on her?
After.
No, after he fell on her. But there's a, not totally be telling it. They covered his face is an analogy. They killed him, is what it's telling us. They executed Haman. And then they covered his face. You don't cover a face when it's not dead. You see? Okay. Then that's verse 8. And then they hanged Haman they hanged him on the tree, meaning the stake he had prepared for Mordecai. And that's in verse 10. That's in verse 10. They're hanging his corpse for everyone to see. Again, impaling on a stake was, and this is from the IVP commentary on what we always talk about. It's a nice thick book on giving you context for different passages. And according to them, it was a quote from them, a treatment of the corpse rather than a means of execution.
So then
You
what
see?
was-
That same day, chapter 8, that same day, the king gave the king gave his house to Esther.
Oh.
That's a pretty good day. She thought she was going to die. Now she's getting this huge estate, this huge mansion of Haman. She put Mordecai in charge of that house. And the king removed his signet ring and gave it to Mordecai.
Yay!
Right? So now he's got authority to make royal decrees. This is before they get to talking about what are we going to do though? We're still doomed to die. The king, when the king says something, it's irrevocable.
Right.
And he already decreed this against us. What are we going to do? And she's saying, even though you've done this for me, king, how can I endure? Sometimes, have you ever felt like you just can't go on? Like you're so much stress in your life, it's just overwhelming you.
God bless you.
And it feels like there's no way out. There's just no escape. How can I endure? Come up with a plan, a new decree. And what was the new decree? Quote, the king had granted the Jews, and this is put together by Mordecai in a letter going out in all the provinces. The king had granted the Jews the right to defend themselves on the designated day. But it goes further than that. All the officials on the king's side, they know who the queen is now. They know who Mordecai is, that he's been raised way up. So they're all siding with the Jews now. And they're all giving support to the Jews now throughout all the provinces, you see?
I want to be a Jew also.
You know what? Getting there. Mordecai left the king's presence arrayed in royal tachelet.
Wow.
See the color and these tzitzit down here? The color is called tachelet. Or techelet. You see? Mordecai left the king's presence arrayed in royal blue, or tachelet and white. What are those colors significant for these days?
Israel.
The Israeli flag. Yeah. Wearing a large crown. See, I'm dressed as Mordecai today.
Yay!
The story. Still Mordecai.
Hey.
Has it changed?
Not really.
It's like the burgers.
Wearing a large crown. Okay, it's not so large. And a robe of fine linen. Who wore fine linen?
Priest.
Kohanim, yeah. And purple. What was the color purple significant for? Royalty. He left the king's presence dressed like this. Amazing. And it says the Jews had light, gladness, joy, and honor. They were certainly joyful. They had light. They had a light at the end of this tunnel. We have hope now. They had light. They had joy. They had gladness. Like, hey, are you kidding? Woo! Dancing the hora, right? Happy. And honor. Not just some kind of vague hope, but also they were being honored by the king. And they all knew now the queen is a Jew like us. Wow, who knew, right? Okay. And then it says, many from the peoples of the land became Jews. You might say they were grafted in. I think a lot of people recognized what happened here. They recognized that there was some sort of a God involved. The God of the Jews, he must be very powerful. How can he rescue them like this? They were all going to be exterminated, and now look. Suddenly the queen is a Jew, and the second guy in the kingdom is a Jew, and they're being given the right to defend themselves and wipe out people who would attack them. They must have a very powerful God. And besides, I always liked those Jewish guys. Right? So many people from the land became Jews. And the war came, and the day came, and there was a big battle all over the place, especially in the capital. All the officials helped the Jews. All the officials helped the Jews. Verse 3. Mordecai became great. Mordecai the Great. Right? He's really going up in places. 75 in the first day, 75,500 dead in the first day. All around the provinces. The second day, another 500 dead, only in the city of Shushan, because the queen requested a second day from the king, because there were still a lot of enemies left in Shushan, the capital. Kathy was like, can we get one more day? Right? He's like, are you happy now? There's all these people dead. And she's like, that's pretty good. But what do you mean one more day?
You can do better.
You can do better. And along with that, they put to death the 10 sons of Haman. to push this understanding of the hanging on these pointed stakes, this impaling. If you read this particular part, you see that they put to death the sons of Haman in verse 10. And it was later on that they had them hanged, basically impaled, hung on the tree, impaled on the stakes, long after they'd been dead for a while, before they're hung on these stakes. Okay, so this is the victory, this is the deliverance, this is God being involved in all the intricate details. The good things that you do, you might not see any reward right away, like Mordecai didn't at the gate. He saved the king's life, for crying out loud. Nothing happened to him. He got no reward at all. Imagine how he felt.
You got no respect.
No respect at all. Until later. Until much, much later. You might do things for God all the time, and you feel like, why am I doing this? I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of this. Well, that's the wrong attitude, first of all. Second of all, we will all get a reward for serving God. Everything you do. You don't think He keeps account? You don't think He's a God of justice? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We have something to look forward to. And you know what? It might not even be in this life. And if not, you know what? That means even so much better later.
Mm-hmm.
So who wrote the book of Esther? It says in verse 20, we're in chapter 9, Mordecai recorded these events at Esther's order. It says in verse 32, who instituted the holiday of Purim in Persia? Mordecai. In his writing, he told the people to do the 14th and the 15th of Adar. He made a holiday for sending food portions. How many of you sent any food portions this year? See what happens? I guess we're not so traditional anymore or something.
We did.
We did as a congregation, we did.
Yeah, we did. We did.
Right? And gifts to the poor, verses 20 to 22. This is how you celebrate Purim. Gifts to the poor. And food portions to each other. So maybe you know like some favorite foods or something. You know, I used to get, when I first joined the Navy, my father used to send us care packages, right? Special meats and cheeses or something, and
Cookies and crackers.
Yeah. And that was a big, that was really a big deal for us.
When you were overseas,
It was a very big
Heinz
deal.
57 sauce. It improves food.
So, and they called it Purim. Why Purim? Because after those lots that were cast, or not really cast, right? Caused to fall. Right. But what about us in this room right now? Why is Purim affecting us so much? What's that about? You know what? Why do we still celebrate Purim? It says that, it was the commands of these two. They're not in charge of us now. They've been dead a long time ago. They were in an empire that no longer exists. So why do we still celebrate Purim? The Jews, quote, the Jews took it upon themselves, verse 23, and all who might join them, verse 27, that these days would be remembered and observed throughout every generation. That's why. That's why. Verse 28. And we end in chapter 10 with the king calling for taxes. Right? Like, what? What is that doing in there? What's the big deal with taxes? I think it's probably a very important thing that the state was going through. After this big war campaign of many years, he was probably after having a big party like for weeks, right, and giving everybody all they wanted, and then going on this big expedition, expecting booty, rewards and stuff, and then they get nothing, they lose, and they come back, and he's got to do something to pay for all of this. So you see, I'm wondering if Mordecai suggested, you need to raise the taxes for a little while to pay for all that. And so we see Mordecai's been raised to power, and then you see these taxes, probably to pay for the military plunder. And then you see Mordecai, it says Mordecai is in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. We already knew part of the story was in there from when he saved the king in the assassination plot, because, right, that's how the king wound up changing, trying to honor Mordecai on the very day that Haman was going to, Haman was going to execute it. And now, instead of Haman being the second man of the kingdom, now it's Mordecai who's the second man. Just like there's another Jew who was the second man in the kingdom who saved a lot of people, Joseph. Very unexpectedly. And it says of Mordecai, he sought the good of his people. I don't know what you want to be remembered for one day when you're gone, I think that's pretty good, though. To leave a legacy like Mordecai, that's good stuff. When you go, if you visit Israel, you go to Yad Vashem, there's a place near there where you can go and you can see there's a large field where all the Goyim, Gentiles, the righteous of the nations are honored. People like Corrie ten Boom, for example. Oskar Schindler. People who rescued Jews during World War II. And others, where they're honored. I think those are pretty good legacies too. He sought the good of his people. That's the story of Purim. In the Brit Chadashah, there's a Greek word, atan, nestunte. I won't ask you to say that one. Whenever, this is Yeshua speaking. He said, whenever you fast. Like Esther. Whenever you fast. There are times when we need to fast. There are times when we need to fast. There's some demons who won't come out unless you fast. For example, the time, one time Yeshua was asked, our Talmidim, our students, they fast, and Yochanan, his students, they fast, but your students don't fast. He said, well, when they're with the brides, the groomsmen are with the groom, then they're not going to fast. It's party time, but they'll fast later. They will fast later. If the Talmidim, if the apostles, the emissaries, if they fasted, shouldn't we fast? There are times when we need to fast. In the first century, Messianic believers fasted regularly, multiple times a week. You know, there were 2 days every week that they all fasted. 2 days every week that they fasted. How often do you fast?
What days was that?
Well, I don't remember. It's Tuesday and Thursday, or Monday and Wednesday, if I remember right. And because those two flips, eventually first they were all the same, but then the people who were not Messianic, who wanted to attack the Messianics, they said, well, we want to do some things to identify them, so we're going to change some things. We're going to fast on these other days, right? So it was one of those, one of those deals to help identify Messianics was to change the days that they fasted and make them different. There are times when we need to fast. Do you fast? I want to ask you another question. Do you have things in your life, do you have times in your life when you're desperate, when you feel like you're cornered, when you feel like there's no way out?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then maybe you might think about fasting. Thank you. I mean, are things so good in the world right now? Are you so comfortable in your life?
No.
Are you above it all?
Mm-mm.
Is it like, oh, none of that stuff should be? I don't feel any responsibility about any of those things. I'm just a regular Joe. I don't have any impact. God put you here for such a time as this. You are in certain people's lives for such a time as this. You are in America for such a time as this. You don't think God listens to his people when they call to him? You don't think he's touched when they're grieving and they're going to him with fasting, denying themselves? I'm not sure we have the same God then. Because that's not the God I read about in this book. What has God given you in your life? How blessed are we in this country? How blessed are we in this century? You know, with all the innovations, I mean, indoor plumbing. I guess sometimes I think, man, I don't know if I could handle being like in the 1700s without indoor plumbing. I mean, I just think that would be really nasty. I guess if I was born at a different time, I would feel differently probably, but I think we're very blessed just for indoor plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
Baruch Hashem, indoor plumbing. And so many other things. This country has been so richly blessed.
He was the guy who started.
All the things God has given you, the gifts, the talents, the resources, the skills, the abilities, all that he's given you. Consider where he's placed you, because he has placed you here and now. It's no mistake. It's not random chance. What you do with, you have responsibility then. And what you do with that, that's on you. That's on you. But he put you here for such a time as this. Amen?
Amen.
Just as it was in Persia after Haman's decree.
Boo.
Anti-Semitism is on the rise around the world right now, including in the United States. Right now. You know, the adversary he hates. You know who I'm talking about when I say the adversary?
Yes.
That's really the interpretive meaning of a certain name you might know. Starts with a big S, ends with Atan. Yeah. The adversary. He hates the God of Israel, and he hates the King of the Jews, that's Yeshua, and he hates his people.
Mm-hmm.
That's Israel. That's the Jewish people and everyone who's drafted into Israel. Every generation faces this same test.
That's right.
Where will you stand when you see the adversary coming against Israel, against his people? You know, Yeshua returns. You can read the account of when he returns. He's returning to Jerusalem to save his people from all the world's armies that are gathered against them. Did you realize that? He's coming to save them. And they will see him coming in the clouds of heaven, it says. They will see the one who was pierced. And they will mourn for him as for an only son, it says. In other words, they will recognize who he is. There's no doubt he's Yeshua. There's no doubt he's divinity. Look at him coming in the clouds with this massive angel army behind him. Duh. I think you can figure it out. They will know he is, and they'll mourn. What does that indicate? Teshuvah, godly sorrow. And Romans says, and it is in this way, when they are regrafted, the natural branches that the Gentiles were not supposed to boast at all against, but they've been boasting against for thousands of years, when they see that, then these natural branches will be grafted in again. God says it could happen in Romans 11, and then it says, in this way, all Israel shall be saved through this regrafting. Why a regrafting? Because you can't, whoever's left of Israel at that time, when he's returning, coming in the clouds, they will all see him. They will all recognize him. They will all mourn. And there's another phrase in there, and it's when he returns, God turns away the ungodliness of Jacob. We are talking about Teshuvah. Talking about Teshuvah. Yeshua returns to rescue his people. And when he comes to rescue his people, where will you stand? A lot of people in the world claim to be believers in Yeshua, followers of Yeshua, and they hate Israel. And they hate the Jewish people. Because a lot of people have been lied to. A lot of people have heard a different gospel.
Replacement theology.
I pray that's none of you here, or at least that maybe if you have grown up with some of that stuff, that maybe these messages are reaching you then to help change, and you can spread the word. When you hear replacement theology, you can start to recognize it and talk to people about it. You say, no, brother, you have a wrong understanding there. I don't think you get it. The new covenant was made with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So in order for you to be in that new covenant, you have to be grafted into Israel with those natural branches that you say you hate so much. Yeah, it really is the new covenant that we're in. You can read about it in Hebrews chapter 8. Where will you stand? Because it's coming. Make no mistake. Our generation is not special. Much as we like to think it is. We're starting to see it now. I don't think I can pray with this on my head. That wouldn't be right. So this is the story of Esther, and this is how it fits you. It's a story about a person, a common person, who was put in a position to impact their generation, to impact the world, and make a difference. And she might not have even known it if someone wasn't there to tell her, her uncle, to guide her, and to help her to recognize it. Well, I hope I'm helping you recognize you have a place. You might not be royalty. Maybe one day you'll be something close to that. Or maybe you know someone. You know, people like that eunuch who watched over Esther and guided her on how she should act when she goes before the king. What if he didn't favor her? What if he didn't give her good guidance? Maybe the king wouldn't have chosen her. Maybe we have a whole different story just because of a eunuch.
Who's in such a place as that?
The stranger should not say, God will separate me from his people. So you see this, Shabbat is for all mankind. Sukkot we will all celebrate through the ages. There's a grafting going on, but it's not a grafting of the Jewish people being ripped off of their tree and being grafted into the Baptist tree. No offense, Baptists, I'm just saying. It's not the Jewish people being ripped off the tree and being grafted into a Catholic tree, a new tree over there. Or a Presbyterian tree, or an Anglican tree, or a Presbyterian tree, or an Assemblies of God tree. There's a grafting going on, but a lot of people have the idea backwards.
Mm-hmm.
You get your nourishment from the root, and the root comes through Israel. You can embrace it, or you can reject the grafting. I had people in a study before who were farmers, you know. They were able to talk to me very intelligently about, you know, things like grafting. Like they've done grafting. You could take branches from different trees and put them into, like an apple tree. They could take an orange branch or something, and branches from other trees. And you know what the weirdest thing? It helps if the grafting takes root. The tree gets stronger and the branch survives. And it's so weird. You can get different fruits on the different branches. That is so weird. I would love to see that. I didn't see it, but they told me. I trust them. Maybe I shouldn't, but I trust them. I'm getting some nodding, so I guess.
Flowers too.
Different flower, different fruits from the same tree with these grafted. What an amazing! You know what? That's a picture of the fruit of the tree of life.
Yes. Yeah.
The branches that bears different fruit every month.
Yes. Yes.
Amazing. Well, wild branches, you're grafted into Israel. It's not the other way around. Your nourishment comes from there. And we're talking about nourishment that comes from here, nourishment that comes from there. This is a cultivated tree. Right? Some people, you either embrace now some of those branches, they strengthen the tree and the branches survive, but other branches reject the grafting. When you try grafting branches, sometimes the branch rejects the grafting. Did you know that? You know what happens to those branches?
They die.
They die. They die. I think that's part of the picture, to be honest with you. We're called to be one body, Jew and Gentile. Gentile, by the way, is not a derogatory term. It's not Jewish, that's all. Now, there are times when it's used in a different kind of way, but the word in itself is not a derogatory. That's all it really means. It does not equate to heathen or pagan or something. Although sometimes maybe Shaul will use it that way, other times he didn't. There are verses that talk about, he's an emissary to the Gentiles, for example. Don't feel like you're lesser or something. That's ridiculous. Scripture doesn't say that. Scripture doesn't say that at all. If you struggle with that, then come and see me later, because I don't want everybody to. It's already 5 o'clock, so. But please don't struggle with that. This isn't. You're not second-class citizens here. Do you understand? I hope you do. We covered that earlier, right? No longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female.
That's right. That's right.
Well, we really are, but it's talking about before in God's eyes. He doesn't look at you and say, well, Jane, you got to wait a little while. I'm still listening to the men over here, for example. We're all the same in his eyes. We can all come into his presence. He listens to us all. We're all his people. Some would, and going along, that flip side, some people might feel that way in some congregations. In other congregations, it's the opposite, where Jews feel like they're left out. Reading those stories of the days of the Inquisition and whatnot, there are many Jewish people who were forcibly converted, and so it was for many insincere, and some were sincere. And some lived the way that the first century Messianic believers with Yeshua and the emissaries directly in those days of the first century, where all the miracles were happening, they lived just like they did, following the Torah, celebrating the festivals because God commanded it, and sending out emissaries to the world so that you would wind up sitting here one day. Well, they lived like that in Spain during the Inquisition. Some of them had actually embraced Yeshua. And you know what happened to them? If they were caught celebrating Shabbat. Ooh! Or they wouldn't eat pork. God forbid! Burned alive on a stake for obeying God. We're a peculiar people with a different Torah. That's not an evil thing. Obeying God is not an evil thing. Amen?
Amen.
And the Torah and Shabbat are for all mankind. You are welcome in this tree. You are welcome in this tree. Sit or stand, whatever. And it looks like we have some bit of an oneg out there too, by the way.
Yep.
So don't run off too quick. Grab some food. And maybe in an hour we have prayer too, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're so inclined. If not, it's okay. But be blessed. I hope this message blessed you. I hope you were touched. I hope it was made relevant. I hope you grasped the story better. I hope you internalized it. And I hope it impacts your life. And maybe even impacts those around you, those you know. Maybe there are things you can share about Purim now that might change this generation. Who knows? Who knows? God knows. May He bless you. Yavarach Adonai v'yishmarecha. Yair Adonai panav elecha v'chulecha. Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Adonai bless you and keep you. That is, favor you and guard you and protect you. Adonai make his face to shine upon you. Let's give you his favor again. Smile on you and be gracious to you, giving you his mercy. Whether you deserve it or not, may he give you his mercy. Adonai lift up his countenance upon you. Let him make his presence known among you. May he cover you with his presence, surround you with his presence. Not turn away, especially in need. May he dwell among you and in you and give you his perfect, holistic peace in every area of your life. May you experience wholeness, tranquility, and blessing. May he give you his shalom. Not by my word, but by the power and the authority, the name of Mashiach. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.